to Clap for Clapboards, presented today by Jonathan Hall, our Field Services Manager here at Maine Preservation. Just a couple housekeeping items, and I think most people have been Zooming for a while now, but just in case, you can feel free to have your video camera on or off. If your connection's unstable, turning it off might help. Do be on mute when you're not speaking, and we will mute you to keep the sound noise down, but you can always unmute to speak. You can ask questions using the chat feature. So you're going to find that in, it's typically floating around either on the bottom of your screen or on a little strip. And there's a little chat button in there, and you can press that and send me a question, and I'll ask Jonathan. Or you can wait till we do Q&A pauses and unmute yourself and ask your question directly. And we really want to hear from you, so keep it interactive and welcome. So I'll turn it over to Jonathan, and he's going to tell us why we should be clapping for our clients. I'm excited because I have them all over my building, and some of them are damaged. So I'm here to learn too.
Okay. What to do with the old clappers? So they can obviously come in a wide range of conditions, as evidenced by this beautiful barn. I'm not sure where this is. It's just kind of a stock image. But it obviously needs some help. So how could we help that beautiful old barn to look as good as it should? So typically, the problems with clapboards, they're pretty standard. Most to do with weather and the effects of weather, as can be understood, since they do bear the brunt of the weather on the exterior of a building. So typically, you find them covered with later siding, and that could be in this the picture we see here. It's some sort of fake brick kind of stuff, which was just nailed over the face of the wood siding underneath. That could also be vinyl siding. It could be aluminum siding or something like that. And the upside of those is that in a lot of cases, the siding underneath is actually in pretty good condition. Sometimes the building features were a little damaged when they had the later siding. But sometimes once you take that off, it can reveal some pretty nice wood siding. Other problems, of course, you may have to deal with lead paint issues, which can add some cost to a project, but not cripplingly so. Some contractors may bring up the lead paint as reason to remove all the old wooden siding, which would not really a recommended approach. The old siding in some cases has been in place serving well for a couple of 100 years, and with a little care and maintenance, it certainly lasts for another couple of 100 years. And the fact that you would remove the old siding doesn't mean you would, at that point, you don't have to deal with lead paint, because the debris that's generated when you're removing the old siding is going to generate massive amounts of lead dust, lead chips, and that kind of thing. So you're dealing with it all at once instead of just as necessary. So if the paint is intact, and it's secure onto the substrate, there's no reason to really remove it all and replace it with a less desirable material. And then, of course, rot is the other problem. Typically, found in predictable spots where there's a lack of air, where water gets trapped, moisture is never allowed to air out, and those sorts of things. So, with regard to the first issue, unsiding your house, Historic New England recommends there can be a 2-season project. So first you remove the vinyl or aluminum or fiber cement or whatever it is, and then let the siding underneath just sort of air out for a season. During that time, you can do repairs. As you can see in this case, the window hood was removed in order to achieve a smoother, flatter surface before they put on, I think in this case it was vinyl siding. So you certainly could make some repairs like that. Give the building a good cleaning. Obviously not with pressure washers, but just, you know, a good scrubbing, really, just to get dust off, dirt, maybe mold and mildew. So it'll give all that a chance to sort of air out. And then the following season, once all that is done, you can think about actually repainting the wooden clapboards. So the lead paint issue, any contractor you hire who would potentially disturb more than 6 square feet of material containing lead paint, which is about half a door, so it's really a pretty low threshold. It has to be certified by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, who is tasked with enforcing the lead safe RRP requirements. And this RRP stands for repair, renovation, yeah, the P escaped me right now. But anyway, it's not abatement, so it doesn't mean that the lead paint has to be removed all the time. It just means it has to be handled carefully while the work is going on. The job site has to be cleaned on a daily basis. Has to be cleaned as a final step in any construction project to the standards established by the EPA. Contractors have to, it's just an 8-hour certification class. It's good for 5 years, and then they have to take a shorter recertification class. And at least one person in the firm has to take this class. So the requirements are not onerous. I mean, it's just basically keeping a clean work site. In the picture on the left, you can see at least 2 OSHA violations. So, you know, that's a separate issue, but the guy standing too high on the step ladder, another guy has the A-frame ladder leaned against the house. But they are fully suited, as they should be, for dealing with lead paint. So, and the certified personnel at the firm has to be on the site when the work is going on. So if the owner of the company has gotten his certification and he's off preparing proposals or bids for other projects, and he's not there on the site, that doesn't count. So it has to be somebody who's on the site on a daily basis. And again, they have to just, you know, maintain a clean work site, which they, you know, should have been doing all along anyway. So it's really not that much of a additional burden on the contractors. So make sure that they have that lead safe certification before signing the contract, before any work starts. So removing the rotted siding piece by piece, if that's what's called for, can be it can be a process that requires a fair amount of patience. The old siding tends to get very brittle over the years and can easily break if you're really rough with it. And then the next thing you know, you're not replacing just 1 or 2 pieces of siding. You're replacing a lot of square footage of siding that is otherwise in good condition and doesn't need to be replaced. So it's just, it takes a little time. It takes a little patience, conscientiousness, but it can certainly be done carefully and effectively so that you only replace. And as I said, it's typically these rotten pieces of siding, or you find them in the corners near the ground. In the picture on the left, you can see up where the side roof. So it's pretty predictable, and usually they're pretty easy areas to get. In siding, there's some pretty low-tech stuff for tools is involved. So let me just start with, obviously, if you look at the picture at the bottom, showing the cut with the handsaw, that is certainly an option. Although over the years, I have gotten away from doing it with a handsaw and started finally, after some convincing from some colleagues, of using these handy little oscillating saws. And the primary reason I didn't like them originally is just because of the noise they make. They're very noisy, but they're also very effective. And you obviously want to, before you make that cut, that first cut, to free the siding from the other, the surrounding siding that is not rotten, you want to ideally find where the studs in the wall are and cut it over that, so that you get, you know, a good amount of strength at that butt joint. If that's not possible, you could certainly take out a longer run of siding and just go from end to end. But sometimes it's better to just, you know, cut out a shorter piece and replace as needed. The spray bottle comes in as an effective way to just control if there is any, not only lead dust, but it comes in handy for controlling the lead dust. If you just wet the surface of the board before you start to cut, before you start to, especially with the oscillating saw, before you start your cut, you wet the surface of the board, and it keeps the dust under control. But not only that, it just over the years, a lot of dust accumulates behind the board, and you can kind of use it as you're going to keep that under control a little bit. Obviously, you don't want to soak everything, but just sort of keep the dust from getting airborne and flying all over the place. And then once you make that cut, or even before, you can see in the pictures at the bottom these little wedges or shims that you can use to just sort of gently pull the siding out at that lap joint at the bottom, and just very slowly and very carefully. You're just trying to free the nails up. So you're not trying to force it. You're just trying to gently coax it away from the side of the building. And sometimes, you know, it can take an hour or more to coax that loose so that you don't break the surrounding siding and you don't do more damage than you're trying to repair. Materials are important on our historic houses. A lot of times you'll see people using cement board. There are quite a few different brand names for it, and it's just one of those things that in construction, there's nothing wrong with it. It works well, it works fine. But on historic homes, it's really best avoided. And in fact, you'll see a lot of projects going on recently where there's just wholesale removal of historic siding, and they will replace it all with this cement board, which is, you know, really a lot more damaging and destructive than the vinyl siding was back in the 70s and 80s. At least with the vinyl siding, most of the material is left intact underneath it. I have seen people go over historic siding with the cement board, but typically you'll see them just ripping off the historic siding, sometimes even the sheathing, and just doing massive amounts of damage. So really, the best material that I know of to get replacement material for historic siding is the radial sawn reproduction clapboards. The great thing about radial sawn clapboards is that the grain of the wood tends to be close to perpendicular to the face, so it resists cupping and splitting and warping and all that a lot better than the more commercially available flat sawn siding, where it's really just kind of it's just not a very good process for the strength of the wood and the rot resistance. So this radial sawn stuff is a far superior product. And there are a few suppliers regionally, one that I know of in Vermont, and there are a couple in Maine. One up in Blue Hill, one I think up around Bangor, and then the best known one is probably over in Vermont, best known one in this area. And it's available in quite a few different species, and cost can vary depending on what species of wood they're using, the lengths that you're trying to get, quite a few different factors. And now we will take a brief intermission. This log, you can see, is in the process of being radially sawn for clapboards. And I just love this video. This is from Ward's Mill over in Vermont, and I could watch it all day, as long as I can get it to work.
Yeah, it might be on the screen that is not this screen, so you might have to switch your share.
Help me.
You might have to take down the share and then hop over to YouTube and reshare and then share back. I know that's brutal, but.
So what do I do next?
Now share YouTube, share your browser.
Okay.
We count on air for a lot of important things. Compressed air.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. So I just love that video.
Everybody knows that real estate is a great investment, but what if you
Press pause. And everyone, if that seemed a little herky-jerky to you, we'll make this video available, link available as part of the follow-up materials as well. The internet today in Maine is just struggling a little bit.
Yeah. Do we have any questions so far?
We do, actually, and it's from Margaret, and she asked about whether the names of the companies in Blue Hill and Bangor that do the clapboards are available, and if you don't have it now, we'll send that out, obviously, in the follow-up materials as well.
I do have that on my notepad, so I can certainly make it available. One is Katahdin Millworks, and the other one I think is just the guy's name, which I'm drawing a blank on right now. But I can certainly distribute that later on.
Great. That's the only questions we have on the chat so far.
All right. I just think there's something very zen about watching that process of making the radially sawn clapboards. It's I mean, it's an ingenious machine, and they do different widths depending on the just depending on the log essentially. So I think they can do up to 6.5-inch widths, which is usually enough to get your roughly 4.5-inch exposure. So usually that's about all you need. But I assume they could do larger if necessary.
Okay, and we do have another question. How do you recommend, actually we have two people asking the same question. How do you recommend cleaning the clapboards prior to repair and painting? You mentioned scrubbing, and someone else asked this a similar question. What do you recommend for cleaning? Bleach? Question mark.
Bleach is not great, just because it's very caustic and it can have some undesirable effects down the road. So it's best just to use a detergent, a mild detergent, scrub brush, low pressure. You don't want to use a 3,500 PSI pressure washer, although they appear to work great. They can be very damaging. So something as basic as simple green diluted, and if you have some really troublesome mold spots, I found that the food grade hydrogen peroxide is a good thing. Is a good thing to have in your arsenal. And then there are some other house wash things, as long as they don't contain a lot of sodium hydroxide, which is commercial bleach. They actually just a decent detergent and water and a good rinse is usually all you need.
Great. And Les did in the chat to everyone did mention that Ward Clapboard Mill does have a second location in Patton, but notes that their prices have gone up a bit.
I did not know that, Les. I did see in my when I've been looking around about the machine that they use to do that. There are some companies making modern machines that will do that same process, and they're kind of like those portable sawmills. That, I mean, honestly, there are a lot of people around New England that have those portable sawmills, so they can do sort of custom timber sawing. So hopefully, it'll be a little more widespread with the availability of these modern machines that can do both the lathing part and the sawing part. So, that's the upside of technology, is that, some of this kind of machinery is a little more available than it was in years past.
Great. That's the only questions that we have. So.
All right. So that kind of leads us to the priming and painting part. So before you replace any siding, it's very important to get a good primer coat on all sides of the new material, including the end grains. So in some cases, you'll actually have to cut it to length and then prime the ends, because the ends actually absorb a great amount of water, because it's, you know, it's where the capillary action of the wood is most effective, and it will just sort of act like a straw. And you know, most failures of not only paint, but where rot develops is, you know, at the end grain where those butts come together. You can see in the picture on the right is, you know, the paint is failing right there at the butt joint. They've got their nails really close to the end too. So prime the face and the back, and, you know, all four sides essentially. Before you do any installation, and just let it dry thoroughly, and critical step, absolutely critical. And then fastening the siding is also a very important step. It's a good idea to get a little, where those butt joints come together, you get a little piece of, some people use roofing felt, other people will use like a little piece of metal flashing, so that if that butt joint does separate and some water can get in there, the little piece of flashing sort of goes over the top of the next piece of siding down, and will divert whatever water does get in there to the outside of the building, so it doesn't get trapped behind the siding. So it's, as Greg likes to say, it's always the flashing. So those little steps can be very important to the longevity of the project. And when you're nailing the siding, it's important to use the proper nails. Stainless steel nails are preferred, although I mean the old siding nails tend to be just, you know, iron steel nails with a, you know, they could rust if exposed to water. Nowadays, stainless steel is really the preferred fastening method, and it's also important not to nail too much. So you don't want to overdrive the nails. If you're using a nail gun, it's really important to make sure that the depth the nail gun is driving the nails is not too great. So you just want them snug. You don't want them. You don't want the nails sunk way in beyond the surface. You just want the nails driven in snugly to hold it, but that they're not sort of breaking the surface plane of the siding. So really, you could make an argument for hand nailing all of this stuff, but nobody really likes to do that anymore. It takes a long time, and more often than not, you'll see people using nail guns. And the other important thing is not to nail through the two pieces of siding, so that they can, so you don't want to put one nail through two pieces of siding that are lapped over each other. So just, you know, one nail about an inch or an inch and a quarter from the bottom edge of the siding, snugly nailed, but not over driven in there. And that allows the siding to move around as the weather conditions change. If the siding can't move, expand and contract, it will split and crack and shorten the lifespan. And then nail heads should be primed prior to finish painting. Otherwise, even though they're stainless, you may get some little rust blooms around there. And then the other important thing is caulking. Only caulk the butt joints, never the lap joints, even though some people, when they look up at the side of their building and they see all those cracks at the laps of the siding, they don't think it looks very attractive, so they will caulk all along there. But that again is another thing that can trap moisture behind the siding and prohibits the siding from moving as it needs to do to breathe and just maintain its flexibility and function as it's supposed to do.
Okay, we have a couple questions and comments.
All right.
Susan asked, should you paint the end grain and the back as well as prime it?
It wouldn't hurt if you did, but you know, a primer coat is usually sufficient. Sometimes if there's too much paint on the back, it could potentially trap some moisture in there. The primer is a little more breathable, but and honestly, primer is usually sufficient. So there's no real reason to paint the back or the end grains, as long as you have a good primer coat on there.
Okay. And Les did note to the group that you can get a pre-prime product from Wards. So that was that
Oh, that's good to know.
firm that we were talking about before, yeah. And he also mentioned that company named Wood Miser makes a product that it has quarter sawn clapboards, but doesn't know anyone who's selling them in Maine right now.
Okay.
He then had a comment, and maybe he wants to unmute and talk to you about it, talk to the group. Flashing doesn't work as well as you might think, that the water tends to wick along the metal flash to its edge and then start dripping. I don't know if you have some feedback comment on that.
I've been truly embarrassed because I thought that was going to work, and I screwed up a job and had to take all that stuff off and do it again.
Really? So what happened?
The
flashing at the butts, is that what you're talking about?
on butt joints and when you're butting the clapboards to, let's say, a door or window frame, the water tends to wick along the clapboard or along the flashing and then starts dripping and causes problems. You know, it's really good and it didn't work, and I was embarrassed.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but
Yeah.
I appreciate the comment.
Years ago, but you know, still.
It seems like with most of this stuff, there's usually a good counter argument to things that we do. So it just shows that there's a lot of value in getting a variety of opinions and a variety of experiences. So appreciate the comment, Les.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all we got right now. Yeah.
All right, and this is the same barn as the first slide. So it's and this is from
Wow.
Ward's Mill website. So this is over in Vermont. So you know, as bad as that barn looked, it looks fantastic now. So don't be discouraged if you have some clapboard problems. They can usually be solved. So with that, I'm going to go back to that first slide so we can see
Okay.
it.
Yeah. If anyone else has a question, feel free to offer to the chat or unmute now and ask out loud.
Yeah, please do.
Shannon, okay, so Shannon asks, do you have a good answer as to why a property owner shouldn't cover the wooden siding with vinyl? I know you have an opinion on this.
I mean, the worst thing about it is it's just kind of inauthentic, but I also understand the economics of the whole thing, where, you know, a paint job every 10 or 15 years can be very expensive. And as I said during the presentation, I would much rather see that happen than, you know, the wholesale removal of historic clapboards in favor of, you know, cement board or something like that. So I guess at least if vinyl siding is applied properly, it does a lot less damage than some other approaches. But,
Yeah, the example that she or he gave was a municipal property saying that the vinyl's a better long-term solution, which I think is exactly what you hit on, right? It's going to be cheaper in the long term to cover it.
yeah.
Any concerns about moisture in that situation where it's just covering?
Yeah, there certainly can be, which comes back to the, you know, if vinyl is applied properly, it can be a lot less damaging than some other approaches. But if it's applied improperly, it can be very damaging in itself.
Okay. Excuse me. Myrick asks, what kind of wood is best for clapboards? I got 2 wood questions for you now.
I mean, general consensus is that, you know, cedar is kind of, you know, Western red cedar, white cedar is really good. But, you know, if it's properly maintained and you use that radially sawn clapboards, I mean, they'll use spruce or pine or a variety. Hemlock is really good. So some of that would come down to price. I mean, cedar is probably a bit more, probably significantly more expensive than pine or spruce or something like that. And then that's, you know, that's not even including the, I mean, you could certainly get into exotic woods if you wanted to, but that would entail like rainforest woods, which I think is a different topic. I wouldn't recommend people start buying rainforest woods because of longevity issues, because the forestry practices are not good, and the transportation issue and all that stuff problematic.
The environmental cost is terrible.
Yeah, right.
So John had a follow-up question on the cedar front. I mean, what's the benefit? I mean, why cedar?
Cedar tends to be a little naturally insect resistant. And it's lightweight, it's naturally insect and decay resistant. So those are really the big upsides of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it tends to be a little more long lasting than other types of wood.
Great. And Sarah in the audience noted to everybody that wood siding will last hundreds of years if properly maintained. Vinyl will fade and cannot be painted very well.
Yes.
So those are good drawbacks
Yeah.
to mention. Yeah, thanks, Shannon, for that. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat box. Good questions. So Jonathan, maybe you want to hop back down to the next event slide while we wait and see if anyone else has any other questions. So our next events that you can see on the screen right now. Oh, see, I knew this would happen. Can cedar be painted? I think the answer is yes.
Yes, it can.
Yeah. So that's why I have you go to the side so we can squeeze out the rest of the questions. And I'll continue. Oh, yep, you're welcome, Susan. So the next events that we have coming up September 9th at the same time is Maintenance 101. We're going to talk about how to plan for caring for your old house and setting up a roadmap to make sure that you stay on track and remember the things that you should be doing throughout the year to keep your house spruced up and prevent problems from developing. And I know I need to attend this one. I'm a terrible homeowner. And after that, we're going to take a similar look to what we did here today in our next rehab lab, looking at windows, wood windows. You know, how you repair them, should you replace them, how to fix them, especially thinking about the weights on your sashes.
Have you still got a moment for a question?
Absolutely, yes.
Good. And I painted all kinds of things for 50 years or so. And I still have some questions about the trade-off between longevity and the meanwhile bleaching or otherwise just looking worn. And I ended up with solid color stain in oil. I thought it penetrated well and it didn't do too much damage, and it doesn't peel as we saw in several of the photographs. It doesn't always, it's not always as friendly with the commercial primer nor with the oiliness of the cedar. But Jonathan, you've got some good experience, and your comments are most welcome. Do you have a general suggestion along those lines in terms of what you try to spray, or even better, brush onto some of this replaced siding?
I've used some of those solid stains. I mean, it's been quite a few years since I've used those. The problem seems to be these days with anything oil is, you know, the solvents and the high VOC contents, and people are really trying to get away from those. And for residential purposes, they're a little more problematic in that respect. But they do work great. I mean, I think it's arguable that, you know, the old oil products are, you know, superior to the modern acrylics. But, you know, there seem to be some pros and cons. For example, with primers, some pros and cons of oil versus acrylic primers. Although I think acrylics have the modern acrylics have kind of won out over oil primers for residential use, at least.
How about the contrast between essentially infinite number of particles as opposed to a layer as old-fashioned paint? They wear away the infinite number of individual particles in a stain product as opposed to peel off once you put a continuous layer of something. Again,
Yeah.
what do you feel about that contrast?
I think that stains are, you know, they absolutely have their place, and they have a long history of use. I don't know what you know, into the future. I mean, do you have experience with waterborne stains?
I have, but I've tried to find oil when I could. It penetrates seemingly better and goes on in a more civilized manner.
Right.
In my experience.
It seems that it has a longer open time, it seems like, so it just allows it to just sort of stay on the surface and just penetrate in and soak in.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I think they're great products, but I'm not sure at this point if the availability of oil stains and oil paints is going to be more and more problematic, barring, you know, some other developments in alkyd technology and that kind of thing.
Have you any putting your ear to the ground since we have synthetic oil in all kinds of machinery now?
Yeah.
Lots of cars.
Yeah.
Is anybody thinking about synthetic oil for paint or paint-like, instead of going where they're going now is the essentially plastic?
Right. That's a great question. I've heard of people working with a lot of plant-based oils, you know, and there's certainly been a resurgence of people going back to linseed oil paints. I've heard people making paints out of soy oils and cashew oil, and you know, I think with a lot of those, the jury's still a little out, at least as far as I know, about, you know, how they're going to function long term. But, you know, there are some interesting developments out there.
Good, thank you.
I think that's a great question.
So Myrick had a question about the use of vinyl and versus wood, and is National Register status affected? I point you to the National Park Service on that for guidance. It's strongly discouraged. I will say that first. The first choice is always replacement. If replacement is required, replacement in kind. They have like kind of a step ladder that they'll take you through to understand. First, you want to maintain, and then you want to repair and restore. And replacement is always going to be your last resort. And use of a not in-kind material is super last resort. There are some opportunities to use compatible substitute materials, but it's fairly specific. I mean, I don't want to read it to you, but I will just say you may consider it, however, if the form detailing an overall appearance of the substitute conveys the visual experience of the historic material, and the application of the substitute material doesn't damage, destroy, or obscure the historic features. It's never ideal, particularly, I mean, depending in some historic districts, it will be prohibited except on non-visible sides of the facades of the building. But there's, you know, never and never. But if you're not on the register now and you apply vinyl siding to it, they might require you to take that, I believe, that vinyl back off to get it on the National Register. I'm not 100% sure about that. It's not my true area of expertise, and I think Greg may have had a hop off.
If you can have another moment with me,
Yeah.
I recommended a small church in Maine to be registered, and the expert who was going to come from the commission to do the evaluation saw that the exterior was covered with vinyl. It went over the interesting and complicated shingle from the old days, which the little congregation could not afford to continue to paint.
Yeah.
The interior was spectacular and original. And yet, because there was vinyl over the exterior, we had no further conversation. Sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad.
That is really too bad. I'm sorry to hear it. Ruth did actually have a follow-up question, and Jonathan, I think this would be for you. So they've got the shady side of an 1840s building. It has to be painted more frequently because it's peeling. They're pretty sure there's no moisture barrier. Would you recommend taking off the clapboards, installing the barrier, and then reclabberting it, or is there another method to reduce peeling?
Usually if you try to do that, because the old clapboards are so brittle, there's significant loss. Which is not to say it's impossible, but I mean, I would estimate at least 50% loss. So I don't know if it would be more cost effective to just you'd have to identify whether or not there is definitely a moisture problem, and identify some possibilities of what's causing that moisture problem, and try to mitigate the moisture problem would be a better solution there.
Okay. Great. Any other questions?
Another thought.
Yeah.
In the really old places and barns, there's often little or no insulation or anything else in the walls. And part of the trick is to get the moisture not to hang around in the walls.
Right.
And occasionally you can open the bottom and the top and actually encourage circulation within the old wall without screwing up the plaster on the inside or the siding on the outside. And
Right.
that's worth taking a look at up on top and also down on the bottom. And I don't think you need a fan or anything. You get some convection, but
Right.
it's worth looking at in a cheap first way of trying to keep that moisture from accumulating.
Mhm.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, if you do think of a question after this call, you feel free to always email us at info@mainpreservation.org or jonathan@mainpreservation.org. We'd be happy to hear from you and take your questions. Jonathan, if you want to hop to the next slide. Because we did want to say thank you, and thank you to Norway Savings Bank, one of our sponsors, for helping making this happen here today. Jonathan, Greg, do you have any comments you want to share with the crowd?
Yes, I do. Yeah, thanks, Allie. First of all, my first job on the Revolutionary War Fort, Mount Independence in Vermont, I was sort of experimenting with wood as well, and learned that the most durable wood we've got in Maine is locust. But I would not advise using it for anything but posts. And in that case, make sure it's post size, because you just can't work locust. It's impossible to split. It's impossible to, it's, by the way, it's a very dense wood too, very hot burning wood, but impossible to really work with it. But if you're going to stick it in the ground, it works really well. That doesn't help us with clapboards. But the red cedar also do pretty well as posts. The white cedar doesn't do as well. They do better than most wood. So, and then you get the rest of the western red cedar, which tend to be a little bit more old growth type woods. So they're good to use as well. So that's my little comments on wood durability. Those are the most durable, but others, as Jonathan said, particularly if they're quarter sawn, radially sawn, will work as well. This whole notion, though, of old growth wood, we're looking at it with some new eyes as well. Here we have this amazing product in these historic buildings. It's throughout the historic buildings. And too often we're encouraged on TV shows, This Old House or whatever, to kind of rip all that stuff out and replace with new. And oftentimes that new material is far inferior. And when you think about it from a global energy standpoint, or warming standpoint, we're using an awful lot of energy to transport and pull out these old materials, or especially manufactured materials, to replace them. It really does not pay. And so embodied energy can save you 40 or 50 years of energy use just by reusing it in an historic house. If you tear down the house and replace it all, that's about how long it takes to get back to zero, even if it is a net zero house. So this whole notion of embodied energy and keeping these historic materials is really important in our field, but it's important in other ways as well. So thank you all for attending today. We hope you'll continue to support Maine Preservation. We are hanging in there. It's been a perilous time for all of us, but so far we're okay. But that's partly because we've gotten some supplemental funds like PPP to help keep us in line. So we hope you'll continue to support us, and we hope also you'll continue to be involved in these events online, because we found we have a good audience and have served now, I think, more than 400 folks through these events. So thanks for your attendance today, and enjoy our cool little break here that we're getting in Maine, if you are in Maine.
Indeed, it's a beautiful day. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.